Let's talk about what I learned this month. There is a fun book about math. There is a less fun book about storytelling, which was surprising. One book about visual storytelling, which I really liked. 21 lessons for 21st century. Some of my musings about starting a new job and feeling like imposter and how I'm trying to deal with it right now, how I'm trying not to be overwhelmed. Also, music is my favorite word of the month. It sounds so nice and so sweet and so much better than like reflection or thoughts.
Little unwanted story. This sakura in Stockholm, like a park in the middle of the city, is actually one of the reasons why I moved to Stockholm. Because 5 years ago, when I flew for an interview at King, the friend of mine who lived here took me out for lunch, I think, or after the interview, I don't remember exactly, and brought me here, and I saw beautiful flowers. They're not all in like full bloom yet, but then it was end of April, so it was full bloom, and I thought, oh God, so pretty. That's one of the reasons why I moved to Stockholm. Sold on the beautiful sakura.
First book this month that I really enjoyed was Humble Pie by Matt Parker. He calls himself a comedian, mathematician, or mathematician comedian. I don't know what comes first here, but he does stand up and talks about weird things you can do in Excel, or he has some really good lectures at the Royal Institution, which I recommend watching. I'm going to link them in the description. And one of those talks is oriented towards the book Humble Pie, and it talks about all the mistakes we can do in math. It really kind of brings joy to my nerdy soul, because those are the things that I really like finding in my work. Some like super weird data that you have no idea where it came from. A simple answer to a weird mistake that you've been trying to debug for days with multiple people.
And there's a lot of things that actually are missing visual representation, like some code or values like sites, or just like pictures of the engineering structures that he talks about. So I got a book, and I'm pretty happy about it actually. I think it's better to consume this book in a physical form, because you get to see like different numerical systems, for example. Like things are really hard to explain when you're just like doing an audiobook. So recommend, if you're gonna get it, recommend you getting it as a book. I just listened to a part that's super relevant to all the data analysts and data scientists here, and it's about the daylight savings time and changing of the clock. Because even if you remember that, every year, twice a year, there will be stakeholders that are going to be asking you, what's happening? Why don't we missing data? Why, when we look day over day, the last Sunday has so much less purchases or so many less users? And if you don't always keep track of like, yeah, yesterday was daylight saving and that's why the data looks off, then you're gonna spend a few hours investigating this error that's not really an error. So like, one of the good examples of things that really good to pay attention to, mistakes that you can make with data or math in this book, and the others are also pretty interesting, so definitely recommend to read it to get into this kind of mindset of paying attention to the small, quirky, weird things that could affect your product or whatever you're working on quite a lot. Speaking of mathematical mistakes, Matt Parker also talks about the most popular or famous mistake in Sweden, which sunk one of the biggest warships at the time, Vasa, and there is actually a museum around that ship in Stockholm, which is one of the most popular museums to visit. So
definitely watch his talks. He also has a YouTube channel, and I kid you not, he has like one of the videos about how Apple Calendar was broken in like maybe 1900s, and there's 19 minutes of video pretty much of him scrolling back and forth Apple Calendar on his iPhone, and I watched all of it. So maybe I'm a bit biased towards nerdy stuff like this and finding mistakes, but still I think the book is very, very interesting and brings out a really good point of how we shouldn't be afraid about disclosing our mistakes and that everyone learns on them. So I finally finished The Humble Pie by Matt Parker, and really like the final message that he has in like the last chapter, which talks about the value of actually making mistakes and being open and honest and transparent with those mistakes, because that's how we learn. In the very end of the book, he talks about the Swiss cheese model of counteracting the mistakes, or trying to, limit the amount of the mistakes that you can have. For example, in software development, now there are many checks and tests that you can do. When you write a piece of code, you have to create a test for that piece of code, and then there will be a person who reviews your pull request with this piece of code, and then there will be a system that will try to run the code that you created in some different scenarios, and then there will be a system that merges that, makes sure that the merge is happening correctly and there are no issues, and then there will be another set of testing before the features goes into production, and then when the feature goes into production you can do A/B testing or just look at different kinds of metrics to make sure you didn't make any mistakes. All those things are super valuable, and I think that's the best message out of this book. There is no shame in making mistakes and trying to create the environment where everyone feels comfortable accepting that people do make mistakes, and just focuses on creating those systems that allow for catching mistakes and learning from mistakes is really, 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 really important. Humble is the new black as well. It's also been a month since I started my new job as a data scientist. That's more like a product data scientist. And I've been obviously kind of reflecting on it, thinking through it. So I'm gonna show you a day when I went in the morning to just write down my thoughts about the work and feelings that I have, and maybe some areas that I want to improve, things where I want to be more active, or things that I want to do less of, so that my onboarding is the most efficient and productive for me. For that, I'm trying to do free flow reflections on the last 3 weeks, just all the thoughts that come into my head. And there's one really interesting one that I thought of because of last Friday. So data scientists in the company that I now work for all have to go through a data science boot camp where you'll have 1 week where you connect with other new data scientists across different areas of the product, and then you get one problem to solve in that week or some kind of research to do. And I haven't had a chance to do that yet, but on Friday there was a presentation by another group data scientists who started before, who just finished their bootcamp. And one of them is a senior data scientist, recently joined, kind of in my product area. So I chatted with him before, and he told me oh my God, I feel like I don't know what I'm doing here. This is crazy. I'm working with so many really brilliant people. I feel so junior. And that kind of made me feel what should I think of myself? I'm not a senior there anymore, and rightfully so. There is amazing, brilliant people with much more product experience that definitely deserve that role. But the fact that someone who is hired as senior talks about I feel so lucky that I got hired, make me reflect on how often did I feel like I shouldn't be here. Why was I hired again? Especially that was super prominent when I first got hired at King after master's without really any experience, only doing this research in a research university in France. For years, I think, at least for the first year, I thought constantly I was just lucky. I shouldn't have been hired. I don't know why they hired me. I mean, okay, great that they did, and I'll try to do my best, but why again? There's this amazing principal data scientist that's really brilliant, or this data engineer that I super admire and really miss to this day because working with him was amazing. And and I'm there? Why am I there? And I went as far as I told that explicitly to people I work with, to my friends, I think I just got lucky. If you get hired to a cool company, there is part of luck there. There you have hundreds of applications, and if you are unlucky, even if you're super qualified, you might get missed. The only benefit of having this kind of thought is if it drives you in a positive way to do more or pay attention. But even then, the amount of doing more shouldn't be more than everyone else just because you're anxious. There's like this really fine line between having an imposter syndrome that sort of helps you to be more curious and open-minded and in this learning mentality all the time, and being this super anxious overworker who feels like they constantly have to prove themselves every day just to not get fired. And I'm definitely trying to stay away from the second part because that's super unhealthy for my emotional state and mental state. So the last 3 weeks I tried a new approach to sort of starting working in a company. I decided to implement the idea of the zero circle, where you only really look at the area of your control. And once you master the area of your control, you extend it. I decided to not go all crazy in reading everything about data and analytics in this company, or reading all the projects, all the analysis immediately, working with all the tools and trying out different things. I decided to just like meet people, figure out what's important for them, figure out what are the important things for the business, because that's eventually what I will have to be working with, and kind of take it one sort of step at a time-ish. Although it's many steps in different directions, so not really one step at a time, but like one step in like different directions instead of running all over the place. And so far it's been working, at least in a calming way, so I'm not overwhelmed, I'm not stressed much yet, even though there is of course a little bit of stress since it's a new job. And a lot of people that I talk to, like senior people, senior data scientists, when I tell them like this is my approach, like I don't want to know everything right away, feel like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. So that's pretty encouraging.
Decided to go out on the sun and sit on the sun. It doesn't happen that often here in Stockholm that it's a comfortable weather to sit and eat outdoors, so gotta enjoy it while it lasts. Ooh, another learning that I wanted to share so far, but maybe I'm gonna change my opinion, is a book called Storyworthy. I've had really big hopes for that one because I really want to do better storytelling. I think it will benefit not only this place, this channel, but also my work. It's super valuable to be able to have to tell stories with data. So I've seen that book and recommendations from several YouTubers, and I wanted to try it out, and I've listened to 2 chapters, so it's maybe like an hour in a 10-hour book, and I'm so disappointed. It's just not that engaging, and then I don't know what kind of value can I get out of the book about storytelling. That's not really good in my opinion in storytelling. So if you do know some good, concise, interesting books about storytelling that might be more worthwhile, please do let me know. I'm really interested in that right now. This is a new building that's been built recently next to Boomersplan in Stockholm, and I think in summer they're gonna open there a rooftop bar, which will have some sick views, especially during the sunset. So I'm really eager to see that, and hopefully go to a bar at some point and have a nice cocktail. Even though it's gonna cost me like 200 SEK here, but oh well, that's Sweden. Okay, so I gave another shot to this Storyworthy book, and the next chapter that I've been listening to is about the concept of homework for life. How people usually say that there are no stories that they can tell, that nothing interesting is happening to them, and the author suggests he his solution to this problem that he usually writes a few sentences about the thing that happened during that day every day in a spreadsheet, and those sentences serve him as an idea for a story. And I kind of like that. I hope there is more useful tips in the book than just this one, but this one seems like a really good idea to implement. I don't do that every day, but once a month or once a few months or weeks, I write down random things that I did this month, maybe some moments, especially with friends or close people that I cherish specifically, that made me feel something really nice. I never looked at it like something I could tell as a story, because a lot of them are really personal and I might not want to share them with anyone. But I might pay more attention now to doing this more frequently and focusing on more mundane things. Like the feeling that I experience now is like a lot of peace and enjoyment of the day in the sun. I want to remember that feeling, so I might write it down and I might try to kind of keep up with this homework for life. Maybe not necessarily every day, but some kind of frequent, check-in, like I do monthly check-in with my goals and feelings and learnings. So that's pretty nice, I'd say. Still, that does not justify for me the whole book, but it at least gives me a feeling that, okay, I can give it another shot. I can spend more time listening to it. So yeah, still not discounting it completely, but I don't enjoy the stories that the author tells. Maybe I was thinking they would be better as a stand-up rather than a book, because then you could accentuate certain things that you think are important, and then maybe it becomes more funny or more touching. But as a book, I still don't enjoy the stories. Although this homework for life thing is something that I'll definitely take away from it.
Another book about storytelling, which is something that I really want to take up. It's very important both in general life as being an interesting person and telling about your life, but also at work as a data scientist. We have to do a lot of presentations to stakeholders and explain how a certain feature performed. It is all told through a story, and story is something that's easier to process for a person than just raw numbers. So I do want to learn better storytelling, and I do want to learn it as well for the YouTube and the videos that I make. And one of the books that one of my friends suggested to read is Making Comics by McCloud. This is completely visual representation of the storytelling. It's literally about how to make a comics, how to do the storytelling, how to do the blocks that there are, those pages, the slides, how to emphasize mood, behavior, how to convey emotion through picture and through words, how to be concise and tell a good story. It's not directly applicable to my work, but I really enjoyed it. I think the book is very interesting, very well made. There's like some super small tiny quirks that you notice on the pages that just bring you joy when you read it, like references to some other comics or pop culture. Really like it. I'm not sure how useful that is overall, and if it will allow me to improve, I don't know, my YouTube videos, or I might implement some structure of how you do storytelling within the comics in presentations, just because the format seems very similar. There is visual part to it and words. So with that regard, I think this could be helpful, but still this is specifically about telling in actual fictional story through comics. I think the book is amazing. It's well drawn. It's really interesting. It's like perfect bedtime read, but I will keep it like at the back of my mind. I'm really happy that I got a hard copy. I'll keep it like at the back of my mind and maybe come back to it from time to time. Now coming to my super long read, this book that I started, I think in January. I was listening to it through Audible, and it's 21 Lessons for 21st Century by Yuval Noah Harari. It is definitely hard to read in just 1 month. It's way too big and way too thought-provoking to just browse through it and go on your merry way. After listening to the book, I'd say probably the best way to listen to it is having someone do it at the same pace at the same time, and then discuss those areas, discuss those problems. The author talks about a lot of stuff that's really relevant, and a lot of it is related to technology, how we're handling data, how we're building algorithms, what are the ethics of that, how does that affect work and automation of work. All those thoughts are usually kind of at the back of my head when I'm, just working in a company, because I work in a global company and because I work with data that hundreds of millions people produce every day, and the analysis that I do would impact all those users as well by changing the way the product they interact with behaves. There are all those ethical components of like, who owns that data? Is that the user who owns the data, or the company who owns the data? How ethical it is to look into that data and understand the patterns in it, and how much will the AI evolve from now being able to like suggest to us best ads, best next videos, or best songs, to be able to suggest to us best political choices or best partner choices or work choices, and how much we will be able to have any agency in the world of future, because our decisions are not really rational or influenced by the best thought through processes. They're mostly based on our feelings and emotions, and the artificial intelligence decision-making systems, depending on how they were trained, could eliminate this part of, just the emotional decisional making that is irrational and potentially harmful for humans. There is a lot of topics like this in this book that are just amazing to take one chapter, read it at the same time with your friend or colleagues or someone you just really enjoyed discussing things with, and talk through. I'll definitely come back to it as well, maybe a bit later at some point. But also a thing that I noticed while reading this book is that generally I'm kind of a person that likes to find mistakes and errors and imagine how things could go wrong, which is why I really like the Humble Pie book. But this one is a little bit depressing. The author tries to bring up multiple perspectives and talk through them, which I really appreciate, but it's just so much easier to get attached to the negative turn of the events rather than the positive one for me. Definitely a fantastic read, especially if you like to think and interested in philosophy, politics, ethics, technology. Really good read, but it comes with a little bit of a toll. So definitely recommend reading it with someone who's maybe positive and more optimistic than you, or than me in that case, and could emphasize the more positive outcomes of certain situations. Let me know in the comments what you learned in April, and maybe some book advices. I'll add them to my gigantic backlog of books if I find them interesting. Thank you for watching, and have a nice day.